Who can tell me what this is? Shaw Memorial. Okay, name the movie.
Glory.
Glory, okay. 1989, an amazing film. If you haven't seen it, if you're teaching the Civil War, if you're teaching about civil rights and slavery and blacks and whites, it's an amazing movie to use in your classroom, and a lot of it is accurate, okay? Not all of it at all. This is the story of the white Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, who we'll call Matthew. Matthew Broderick played the role, okay? What happened was, the Civil War started what year? 1861, okay? 1861, blacks were not allowed to fight in Union armies. We had abolished slavery. Massachusetts was the first state to abolish slavery in 1783. When the first census took over in 1790, we were the only state in the new Union reporting no slaves. I say reporting because there were always people cheating, okay? But we reported no slaves. By the time the Civil War broke out, there were 3 generations of free blacks here, okay? So we could easily create an entire regiment out of free blacks, and many blacks wanted to fight because they wanted to fight and save their brethren and their families in the South, okay? However, they were not allowed to fight, partly because the Confederacy had warned, even though these guys are free and their parents are free and their grandparents are free, if we capture one of your black Union soldiers, we will make them a slave. Not a pretty picture, okay? The second thing, which is less admirable, okay, so we're protecting our African Americans, is that we believed in ending slavery, but not everyone believed in equality. In fact, very few people believed in absolute equality. They did believe in ending the slavery. And therefore, there was significant question, and a lot of people said, we want to free the blacks, but they're not equal to us. They can't fight as well as us. They're not going to take orders like we do. Okay, so there was a great deal of bias here, okay? That all changed when the Union started losing the war, okay? January 1st, 1863, Lincoln makes the Emancipation Proclamation, and suddenly you are allowed in a northern state to have black troops. Our governor in our state house right across here was a great abolitionist named John Andrew, and he said, I want to commission one of the first black units, all volunteers. We'll call it the 54th Regiment, but we have to have white leaders because only whites have had the experience, and he didn't say the part about, bias and stuff like that. This is the son of a wealthy abolitionist. He's a Harvard dropout. His name is Robert Gould Shaw, and he agrees to take on these troops and determines to show people, and he learns who his men are, he learns how competent they are. He finds that they're even better than his white troops. He thinks they're the spiffiest thing after working with them for 3 months in Boston, that these guys are the best. This is him and his troops marching right here. If we were here at the end of May in 1863, there were more than 100,000 people in the street knowing that this was a moment in history and we were doing something that other people should have been doing a long time ago. So the troops came by here, the governor and all kinds of people were here watching them move along and saying goodbye to Shaw and his really excellent troops. The fact is, 2 months later, they were given a task that white, black, or any other type of group would have been killed doing. They had to assault Battery Wagner. It was an impossible task. He and many of his men were killed on the battlefield, okay? But they did an amazing job. They were also simultaneously fighting for the rights of black soldiers. At that time, if you were a white soldier, you were paid $13 a month, okay? If you were a black doing the same thing, you were paid $10 a month. And so they refused to keep any pay until all black soldiers, and there were many that followed them, were paid the same as the whites. And actually a lot of local abolitionists collected money to send it to them because they were standing up and not getting paid for what they were doing. Shaw died on the battlefield. He was, we are told, buried because very often in battle, men are buried on that battlefield and left there, okay? He was buried under 24 or 25 of his black soldiers, and people knew immediately that we wanted to have, this was a great moment in history, and we wanted to have Shaw commemorated, okay? So first of all, people said, okay, let's bring Shaw back, let's disinter him. And his parents said, no. You don't get the point. He was working with what he thought were the finest soldiers, making a very important point you all need to know. He wants to stay with his men, he's staying there. When they decided to make the statue, the first sculptor they talked to and many of the people who began fundraising right away after the war said, let's have a statue of him on his horse. And his family said, no, you don't get it. We want him to be with his men. You must depict him along with his black soldiers. They were a unit, they needed to be together. And so it took 32 years for this thing to happen, even though people wanted it immediately after the war. Augustus St. Gaudens, who 100 years ago was probably the most famous sculptor in all of America, created this. He did decide, I mean, obviously there were 1,000 guys here, he couldn't show everybody, but to show Shaw on his horse exactly as he was coming down the streets here, okay, rather than in battle. If he had been in battle, they all would have looked the same and been the same height because they were all on foot. So they wanted to show that he was the colonel, okay, but they wanted to show the black troops as well and imply with the number of, you'll notice there are way more guns than there are guys, all the people who were shown there. So this was huge, gang. The process they went through of wanting to have equality shown here, of wanting to have not only the ordinary soldiers shown with the colonel, but also the black with the white together. This was gigantic. So this is not only a significant suggestion of who heroes are, of talking about democratization of our heroes, but also a spectacular piece of public art.